From the land of conjurers, flying through the internet to your device like a UAP, hauntingly unexplained and downright weird, this is the Witching Hours, and we're ready to take off in the flash of an eye. Good evening to one and all, wherever and whenever you are listening to this program. I am Frosty, and joining me, as always, is the medium Jenny Lee. How are you doing, Jenny?
I'm here. I'm doing all right.
We're here. Another show.
This is 110.
110.
Wow.
Yeah. We're ready to go. Got a great show for you tonight. We're excited.
Yeah.
This one came recommended from our friend Joe. So, yeah. I always look, it's exciting because this has happened a few times now where someone's like, man, I would really like to see you guys. And I've been able to make it happen a few times. So it's always exciting to be able to bring you guys what you want to talk about. Right. Yep. So I'm excited tonight because this is right down my path as well.
Yeah.
So looking forward to the show tonight. I don't know. I guess anything that you wanted to bring up or talk about before we get into the news tonight, Jenny?
I think we're all really missing each other after Teamwear Takeover.
Yeah.
We're already sad that it had been a whole week since we had seen each other in person.
Yeah. Well, me and Jenny were talking about, that's one of the benefits of us going out and doing some of these Paracons and stuff we're doing. Mm-hmm. So we're going to be in Connecticut in July.
We're going to see Joe.
Yeah. So if you're, within driving distance of New England, we're going to be up there. We're going and then we're going to have some more that we're going to do. I think we're going to be trying to do like one a season. So we haven't booked anything for the fall yet. So we'll try to go somewhere in the fall.
A lot of things in the fall.
Yeah. So yeah, lots of cool stuff that's going to be coming around the corner. We'll talk about some of the upcoming guests we're going to have at the end of the show tonight. We got a whole summer booked. If you want to stay inside in the cool air conditioning and just listen to some paranormal, supernatural, and weird stuff, we got it for you this summer because we got a show coming to you every week all the way. We're booked all the way through August, going into September now. So lots of cool stuff coming your way this summer. You ready to get into some news, Jenny?
Of course.
All right. So news tonight. First article is declassified CIA documents reveal plans to create an army of remote-controlled animal assassins. The United States once tried creating an army of animal assassins, which the CIA hoped to use against its enemies.
Are they robots? Robot animals?
Animals, regular animals.
Real animals.
Yeah, declassified documents show that there was CIA, and I actually looked at these documents earlier. They're on the CIA website. The CIA ran a secret program, project codenamed Subproject 94 in the 1960s, in which it carried out tests on wildlife. This included implanting electrodes into the brains of rats, guinea pigs, cats, dogs, donkeys, monkeys, and birds.
Tech donkeys.
Intending to control their movements through electrical impulses.
This is awful. Why do we do such terrible things?
Mm-hmm. The animal experiments are part of a larger program operated by the CIA called MK Ultra, run under the leadership of chemist Sidney Gottlieb.
Children and animals. This is just the best of the best, aren't they?
Mm-hmm. They tried to develop mind control techniques during the Cold War. Criminals, mental patients, and drug addicts were tortured as various experiments were carried out.
Dang.
The redacted files also show that the regular people were given LSD and cocaine without their knowledge.
Yeah, I knew about that.
Yeah, we knew about that. So, however, the biggest part of the experiment was to create an army of remote-controlled animals that could fight the Soviet Union.
The
CIA wanted to send payloads of these animals for direct. Well, I'll tell you, that'd be pretty rough, actually. If you could send some orangutans or something like that.
Yeah. I mean, certain animals are terrifying, but I don't know about donkeys.
Direct executive actions. What the term exactly means is not clear. Talking about the payloads and direct executive actions that were disclosed in the documents. Gottlieb got the idea to create an army of animals from Swedish psychologist Valdemar Felanius, who trained to attach bombs to submarines in World War II. We plan on having the animals plant listening devices and deliver deadly toxins. Gottlieb wanted to use larger animals to act as animal bombs.
Wow, that's awful. What is
Uh,
wrong with these people?
The funding for the program was hidden in the Geschichter Fund for Medical Research, a private foundation set up in 1939 to support research in areas like cancer. In 1977, it was revealed that the fund was being
No wonder
used.
No wonder we haven't gotten the cure for cancer. They're trying to make attack donkeys.
Yeah. In 1977, it was revealed that the fund was being used as a front for MK Ultra's experiments for decades.
Yikes.
The full extent of the experiment might remain hidden forever since Gottlieb destroyed several of the files. Story number 2, new clues unearthed. Well, did you want to say anything about that?
It just never ceases to amaze me how awful people can be.
MK Ultra. I mean, mind control. You know, here's the thing, right? Like here's the thing. It's like, okay, well, you know, MK Ultra happened. Like, I mean, we know this is factual. We know they try to control people's minds. We know that this. So, like, why do we think that it could be any different now?
No, why do we think they're doing anything different? Like, clearly.
Yeah.
Anyway, next story.
I don't know. Maybe that would be a cool topic for, I don't know. Do you have any ideas for people who want to come on and talk about that? Number 2, new clues unearthed in the Lost Colony mystery. A fresh archaeological discovery on North Carolina's Hatteras Island may breathe new life into one of America's oldest unsolved mysteries, the fate of the lost colony of Roanoke. Archaeologists working under the direction of Professor Mark Horton of the Royal Agricultural University in the UK have unearthed 2 piles of iron flakes known as hammer scale, believed to be waste material from blacksmithing activities. That's notable because the iron byproduct appears to date back to the late 1500s, aligning closely with the disappearance of the Roanoke colonists in 1587.
Okay.
According to Horton, the real breakthrough was a hammer scale mixed in with 16th century artifacts. These settlers who had been struggling to survive may have been desperately forging new tools or nails for construction. The lost colony, made up of around 120 English men and women and children, mysteriously vanished after Governor John White returned to England for supplies. When he finally made it back 3 years later, the only clue was the word Croatoan carved into a post. So, you know, if you're not familiar with the story, I think most people are at this point in time.
It's a fascinating story.
Years later, all the colonists are gone. And it's always been a debate whether they died off, whether they were killed by Native Americans, or whether they
were taken in.
Native American group and kind of blended in. There's always been like rumors and legends of people seeing Native Americans in the 1800s and 1700s that had blonde hair and blue eyes and things like this. But here it looks like there's possibility that that's exactly what happened, that they were maybe taken in by the Croatans and assimilated into that. So it's not 100%. They're going to do so. They did end up releasing their discoveries, so that's going to be in a peer reviewed journal for people.
They do keep finding new things about that, which is pretty interesting.
I know. That was one of the things you just figured would never happen, but as you get more advanced in science and social sciences to be able to do stuff, we get more stuff there. So
cool.
Story number 3, a lost world has been discovered beneath Antarctica after 34 million years. Under a mile of Antarctic ice, scientists have uncovered a massive hidden landscape that hasn't seen sunlight in over 34 million years. A stretch of ancient valleys and ridges that may have once supported rivers, forests, and life. Researchers use satellite scans and ice-penetrating radar to spot the region buried deep in East Antarctica's Wilkes Land. It covers about 12,000 square miles, roughly the size of Maryland, and has stayed almost perfectly intact, frozen in place by cold, barely moving ice for over 34 million years.
Wow.
The team identified 3 massive blocks of elevated land, each between 75 and 105 miles long, with deep valleys nearly 25 miles wide and almost 3,900 feet deep cutting between them. These features suggest the area was once shaped by flowing rivers, possibly even home to dense vegetation before it was sealed beneath an ice sheet tens of millions of years ago. The story goes on. It talks about how, most glaciers will destroy what's underneath it. But it says that these glaciers are very they're very slow moving. So they actually do the opposite. They can actually keep intact the landscape beneath.
That's neat.
So yeah, Professor Neil Ross, a co-author from Newcastle University, said the research could help predict how Antarctica might respond to future climate change. Yeah,
there's a lot of
weird,
there's a lot of movies about interesting, strange creatures coming up out of the ice.
Well,
we got a lot of movies about that.
If it's ice, you wonder if there's anything that's still kind of frozen underneath, like vegetation, stuff like that could be studied eventually.
34 million years ago. Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah, I guess something that'll would have to be fossilized. It's not gonna, keep it nice for 34 million. But it could be interesting to see, what kind of stuff we can find there. Story number 4, and the last story for tonight, is humpback whale bubble rings may be an attempt to communicate with us.
Oh, really?
Humpback whales caught blowing giant bubble rings.
Hold on, say that phrase again, because it was very fun to hear.
Which one?
Humpback
whale
bubble rings.
Blowing giant bubble rings underwater. There's a lot of pictures that go with this story, so I'll post it on Discord. Cool. Maybe I'll post it over on Facebook too if people want to have a look at it.
Bubble ring.
May have been attempting some kind of communication with their audience of human onlookers. A new study suggests humpback whales are known for blowing spiral bubble nets to hunt with, but not all bubbles have the same meaning in the world of whales. Some are intended to be playful, some frisky, and others are downright aggressive. The particular genre of bubble blowing documented in the report took the form of perfect circles, similar to ones described by biologist Roger Payne as madly spinning donut-shaped clouds that look like giant smoke rings. An international team of biologists and photographers.
How did the humpback whales know we like donuts?
Reviewed videos and photos of whales producing bubble rings. So
they must have watched The Simpsons at some point.
The variety of sources adds to the context in which whales produce their rings. That their data included a dozen separate examples of rings being made by different whales, equaling a total of 39 bubble rings generated by 11 different humpback whales. While these facts support the fantastic notion of whale to human communication, we're going to need a lot more data before we can be sure of the true meaning of these effervescent messages and whether they're really intended for us. And the research is being published in the Marine Mammal Science.
I like that story.
Yeah. So maybe
it's cute.
A possibility of communication. I mean, that's something we've talked about for a long time, right? Could we open up some kind of communication with us and other intelligent mammals? That would be interesting to see what they have.
Yeah, let's talk to them instead of trying to make them put bombs on things. And
we can make them put bombs on stuff. Why not?
Their skulls. Trying to get them to do terrible stuff. How about that? Sure. How about we talk to them instead? That sounds good.
And that was the news.
Yay.
Brenda Sullivan has been studying and presenting on the art, history, and symbolism of gravestones for more than 30 years. A lifelong Massachusetts resident, she has spent many hours in graveyards all over the world. An education in art history and restoration led to the creation of Gravestone Girls, from a hobby to a full-time vocation. Gravestone Girls' mission is to keep our dead alive through educational lectures, tours, classes, and creation of art replicas of New England gravestones. Annually, Brenda works with many libraries, historical societies, genealogy groups, museums, and other institutions nationwide to raise awareness and teach residents what history lies buried in their own backyards. Gravestone Girl create replicas of old New England tombstones in the form of wall hangings, magnets, coasters, mirrors, tombstone chocolate, and more. I know Jenny won't want to hear about that. Cast directly from original still and cemetery landscapes, their art is a piece of history in your hand, keeping our dead alive through lectures, tours, and all those things we spoke about earlier. Please welcome to the show, Gravestone Girl, Brenda Sullivan.
Oh, sorry, that was me. I'm supposed to do it this time. Hi, Brenda.
Hi. I was waiting for myself to come up on the screen. And
I was too.
Look like, because maybe you guys can see me and maybe you can't. But now we're good job. Thank you so much.
It's just my first time and trying to remember to do it, and I wasn't ready. Welcome in. We're so excited to talk to you.
Thanks.
Let's start at the beginning. What got you interested in researching and learning about graveyards and gravestones?
I live in Massachusetts. I am lifelong New England resident. I basically grew up in my family's cemetery. My grandfather died when I was little, and my grandmother came to live with us. So in the tradition of that generation, we were in the cemetery every week. So my mother was an antique dealer. My father did her restoration work. And I grew up, so that means I also grew up in a house interested in art and history. Mm-hmm. I am an art history and restoration major myself. And I always say the Gravestone Girls is just a hobby that got wildly out of control.
Those are the best kind of hobbies.
Yeah. It works. It works. I'm a corporate dropout because of it. So it works.
That sounds like a good path, a good journey to me.
It was, I thought it was something that would be very niche-y, and I would only be able to interest a small number of people or a small group, and I'd find a ceiling somewhere and okay, that's as far as I can take this vocation. But no, everybody's interested for one reason or another. And I've had an opportunity to work with so many wonderful institutions and groups, large and small, and talk to folks like you and spread the gospel of the gravestone.
Yeah. That's really wonderful.
Yeah, and I know New England has, it kind of has its own thing, I think, when it comes to gravestones. But it's interesting that we're talking because I think, in the United States anyway, Massachusetts and Virginia are about the two places you can go, like the furthest back you can go typically when it comes to European gravestones anyway. So we kind of both live in
the earliest parts of the country. Absolutely.
Yeah. So it's always, two places that are really cool to visit if you're looking for old. It's definitely good to go there.
Yeah, that's true. I didn't think about that.
Yeah. And
keeps me busy.
Yeah. So, and another thing, graveyards are not strange to us either. Ginny was a photography major, so I remember spending lots of hours following behind her.
One of my favorite places to take pictures.
Absolutely.
Cemeteries.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Cemeteries. And we have in Richmond, I don't know if you're familiar with it, but we have Hollywood Cemetery.
I do indeed.
Yeah. So we have a pretty cool cemetery here to check out as well.
A friend of mine, Sharon Pica, is a tour guide over there.
Awesome.
And she's got some dates coming up both in Choctaw Cemetery, which is amazing, and in Hollywood as well. She's written a book also, I believe, about specifically Hollywood, but she's got a couple of books about famous folks buried in the cemeteries around Richmond.
Oh, nice. Might have to look into those.
Yeah, she's a teacher and a scholar, so her stuff is great.
Awesome.
So I guess, to dive in a little deeper, you talking about growing up and, spending a lot of time there, you've decided to do that as vocation. But what is it about the graveyard specifically, or the gravestones that really, call your attention as opposed to something else?
It is the art. It is the history. They are these old graveyards in places like New England, and the stones that were made in this area and made their way out all up and down the East Coast are some of the first graphic art of the New World. It was a picture language, basically from the dead to the living. It's all rooted in early Christian beliefs and ideologies. I call it a scared straight program. And it really is everywhere. And I am of a particular age that growing up, everybody did gravestone rubbings in the cemetery. Totally normal, completely acceptable, no prohibitions, no misinformation. Because there's a tremendous amount of information about that these days. So I rubbed gravestones in that family cemetery age, from probably 5 years old. My mother, here's a here's a pencil and a piece of paper, or get out of my hair. I got things. And so years go by, I've got all these pieces of paper from doing the gravestone rubbings, and then I've got my art history and restoration education on top of that. And I just had a couple of favorite tombstones that I was like, well, I've got 2 dimensions in paper. How about 3 dimensions by making copies? And I can do some shameless self-promotion right now.
Absolutely.
Just so it can translate for folks. So because of my art history and education, restoration education, I developed a process that I can safely take into the cemetery, and I actually take an impression from the face of the stone. That allows me to capture the art, and then I can get it home and replicate it from there.
Wow.
And because of my education and because of my work with the trade to develop a process that is safe and non-invasive, even though I am making contact, I also try to work with whoever oversees the burial ground. I want them to know who I am.
Yeah.
Safe. And so I made a couple with one of my best friends. We just did it for ourselves, trying to work things out. And the joke very quickly became, nothing says Merry Christmas or Happy Birthday like a gravestone. So we gave them as gifts, and we have small ones too, magnet size. And
Wow.
It kind of took off from there. We gave them as gifts, and people said, that's really cool. Can you make me give to somebody, or I want something for myself? And that was 30 years ago, or maybe more. And it was a little progression every year. I'd do a new market. I'd meet new people that would ask me to come and give a tour or give a talk or be on your podcast or whatever it is. And it went through a little every year until I was able to leave my soul-sucking corporate day job.
Woohoo!
15 years.
Well, gravestones, graveyards, cemeteries, gravestones. I mean, they play, to a certain extent, like you said, a lot of people spend a lot of time there, and like Virginia is a place to take cool photos, but to a lot of other people it's very taboo. And so I imagine there's a lot that's kind of unknown about what this kind of stuff represents, even for the people who are from that area, I would imagine, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. If you live in the New England area, you're going to have these spaces in almost every town. Because of our age up here in the Northeast. And you might be in there all the time. You might drive by it all the time and maybe never go in. If you're not from around this area and you see our New England tombstones, they look very different than the stones if you were in Middle America, down south, out on the West Coast, because of the time progression from the colonial period and then through the 19th century and how things changed and evolved on the faces of those stones right up into the 20th and 21st centuries. So it's been fun to sort of see the taboo lift over the years. I've always said that if I tell 10 people what I do, one person runs screaming.
That sounds about right. Yeah.
What is wrong with you? The other 9 people are like, oh my God, I thought I was the only one. And you're not the only one, because most of us are doing it for whatever reason. You're taking pictures, you're going in and visiting relatives, you're making art, you're walking the dog, you're taking the kids in, you're watching the birds. The Audubon bird count annually happens in many cemeteries around the country. Wow. And if you know if you're familiar with the imagery, you always want to learn more. And if you're not familiar with the imagery, well, I got 3 or 4 days to talk about it every time anybody asks me. So it's actually one of the things that we do with our pieces. We've got, they're made from the faces of the originals, so they're to scale. They're elements of the larger stones that still live on the cemetery landscape, and that gets people excited. But the thing that really gets them excited is we always have a history tag on the back.
Nice.
And that history tag tells you the name of the person, the name and location of the graveyard, and also information about the symbol. There's a very definitive set of meanings to these symbols, and they start looking like this in colonial New England around the mid to late 1600s, and they continue to evolve through the 1700s, and then we completely change from these hairy, scary guys, with these death heads, these wing skulls. They're some of the earliest symbols. Like I said, I call it a scared straight program because these burial grounds were typically located in the middle of town. And the folks of the time, very religious, very superstitious, really following the Bible to the letter. And they lived in very difficult times. Death was omnipresent, inescapable, around every corner, and they really knew that. And it was about the care and feeding of the immortal soul. So everything you did counted for or against that's immortal soul's ultimate reward on Judgment Day, whether it was all unicorns and rainbows and ice cream upstairs or really warm climates downstairs. And because these spaces were typically located in the middle of the town, you're going by on your normal day, and these things are looking out at you going, don't forget you're going to die.
Yeah.
And it was meant to sort of catch your attention and get you to go, get out of your head, get out of your moment of the day and go, oh, yeah. Am I doing the right work? Am I doing the good stuff? And this is a climate where the slightest transgression might be the difference between heaven and hell.
For sure.
Every little thing counted. So it was a message from the dead to the living about mortality and morality.
It's like the memento mori, the reminder of death.
Yes. Yep. Yeah. Memento mori. Think on death. Remember death. There's another twist on that. That's memento mortis, which is remember to die, as if you have a choice.
Yeah. Thanks for that. That's fun.
Yeah. And I mean, you get everything on these old colonial stones. You get Latin like that. You get English, written word. You get pictures. And it is for the folks who can read and write, and for those who can't. You're going to have a potentially largely illiterate areas where these spaces are. You've got these really religious folks. They are spending 3-4 hours in Sunday services. If you've got somebody in the house that can read, they're reading scripture at night after dinner. This is being pounded into you all day long and all night long and all weekend long. And the art that comes out of it, is really universal in its meaning. And I'll pull these little guys out again.
And so, of course, we're talking about
like that, and a bigger one, wing skull. They're going to look different based on the hand of the carver, but their message is universal, easily understood by the population of the time.
Yeah, not being mass produced or done by, So we're talking about, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say there were professional tombstone carvers in Boston at the time, doing a tremendous amount of work. There were also people in other places and probably even in Boston as well. I'm okay with my carvers. I'm not great. But taking up carving as a second vocation, filling a need that whether it was monetary or access to be able to get a tombstone. You have all sorts of different skill levels represented out on the landscape, but from an ideological point of view, those symbols all mean the same thing. They all carry the same message.
So in 1600s Boston, 1600s Massachusetts, New England area, we're talking about mostly Puritans, I guess, at that point in time, right?
Yep.
So is this something that they bring with them at all when they come to Massachusetts, or is this something that is kind of a separate culture that's being created in the New World?
They are definitely bringing with them some of that memento mori idea from the continent, and in England as well. They would be familiar with these kind of images from the from broadsides, art in the churches, in the religious centers in England where they may have been before, if they were there before they split from the Church of England, and what they would see when they were on the continent before they came over here. And you can look at Roman stuff and see skulls and crossbones and mortality messages, winged hourglasses. You can see that stuff dating back thousands of years, and they may be applied a little bit differently, for this religious sect or that branch, that religious branch or whatever. But they're familiar. But because they're coming here and they really want to separate from the Church of England, they want to make sure that they don't have anything to do with the Roman Catholics. They are, and, you've still got Anglicans here, and they're still with the Church of England. So you're crossing over all the time. But they are both the Pilgrims and the Anglicans, the Puritans and the Anglicans are using the same imagery on their tombstones.
Okay, that's interesting. So, what do we see? What do we see in terms of like how that progresses through the colonies? Like, is what we see in New England that you're showing us there only in that region, or does it spread to other areas? Because I don't know if I've seen a lot of gravestones like that with that much imagery in Virginia. So, how does that work?
No, and I won't say that I know a whole lot about the early settlements in Virginia, other than perhaps they weren't as permanent as long-standing as they were here. I could be totally wrong about that, but this is definitely tied to religious beliefs. You have that kind of hairy, scary stuff doesn't even really show up in New England until the mid to late 1600s. The folks of the time are very practical. They don't have any need, desire, or ritual for the tombstones from early settlement in the 1620s, Plymouth and forward, until they don't really have they know who they are, they know they're dead, and it's a fact, and off you go into the ground. You also have a lot of settlements around here that weren't always permanent early on. You've got conflicts with the indigenous people. We're chasing them out. They come back, they chase us out. Things are getting burned, things are changing. So we don't really start to have, we reach in the 1660s or so, really last quarter of the 1600s, we kind of reach this part where we are really permanently settled. We're establishing towns. We're being much more organized than we were in the first 40 years or so of being here. And in the Mass Bay, in order to get a charter in the Mass Bay colony of the time, you had to do a bunch of stuff, including building a meeting house and installing a burial ground. So you're building meeting houses instead of churches. That meeting house is being used for religious services. It's being used for social functions. It's being used for governmental functions, typically located in the middle of town. And around here, many of those meeting houses still stand. They may have become the foundation for town hall. They may have become the foundation for city hall after that. And your burial grounds with this kind of imagery were typically located in very close proximity.
Yeah, you don't really have a separation between all those things like you do in other parts of the colonies, for sure. So it's all used as one big thing. Yeah.
Yeah, and even though we came here for religious freedom, once we got here, the Puritans were like, yeah, well, you Anglicans, no, you Jews, no, you got to get out. You Quakers, no, you got to get out. And they went to Rhode Island. Well, the Anglicans did, but the Jewish settlers, the Quakers, anybody that wasn't this original religious group, out you go. And they went to Rhode Island, but they take that they take that tombstone tradition along with them. There's a fabulous old Jewish burial ground in Newport, right by the Truro Synagogue, right across the street, and it's got colonial slate tombstones that we're familiar with, but they're all in Hebrew.
That's interesting.
They've got the winged skulls or the winged souls. They're that old, but they're all in Hebrew, reflecting that faith.
Wow,
that's interesting because I lived. I was a Navy brat. I'm from Virginia originally, but I lived in Rhode Island for 3 years when I was younger, like 10, 11. And I remember, seeing the slate, headstones and gravestones and seeing all that kind of symbolism on it. But that was in Rhode Island. Yeah. Not in Massachusetts. So I imagine even there were probably some kind of minor differences between what you would find in Massachusetts and Rhode Island, or were they typically the same?
They're typically the same. Stylistically, they will visually be different, but from a meaning point of view, those symbols are going to be universally understood. You've got them in New Hampshire. Maine is part of Massachusetts until the mid 1800s. And we've got them in Connecticut and Vermont as well.
So all of New England then?
Yeah, the material is typically different. The geological material is different. It's whatever is close by.
Yeah.
I always say if you take Massachusetts and you split it in pretty much down the middle from about central Massachusetts to the sea, the material is tombstone material and subsequent building materials are going to be slate, because we have a tremendous amount of slate pits that really run from Maine all the way down through New Hampshire, Massachusetts, and clip parts of New York as well. And you take the other half, you take from central Massachusetts out to western Mass to the New York border and down into Connecticut, the locally available building and tombstone material would be brown and red sandstones out of the Connecticut River Valley. You get into Vermont, they've got a lot of marble, so their colonial era tombstones are typically beautifully executed with the images that we know, but they're executed in the local marble material. They're fabulous.
That's really interesting.
They're fabulous.
So would the average person been able to afford one of these engraved symbolic tombstones, or is that more for the wealthy?
There's certainly a money component to it. You didn't always get a gravestone when you die right away. So death rates, mortality rates, very high. And maybe you've got an unexpected death and you don't have the money to put a stone up. So maybe you get one a year later, 5 years later, 10 years later, if you ever get one at all. And the tombstone carvers aren't just sitting around waiting for you to walk in and go, hey, carve me a gravestone. The professional carvers are doing blanks, basically, where they would shape the stone, they'd put all the art on it, and the tablet in the middle would be blank.
It's ready for whoever.
Right. You could go in just like we do today and go, I want that one. Okay, well, that one's $10 or, 10 pounds and 8 pence. So you would pay for the stone, and then you would pay for the lettering by the letter. And the research I've read, it's somewhere between maybe 3 to 5, maybe as much as 8 cents a letter. Okay. So yeah, you do have to have some money, but they're also not they're not going up necessarily as soon as someone is deceased.
Good to know.
Yeah, and I imagine, I don't know a whole lot about burial then, because things have changed so much over time. Like I learned a lot from you, Jenny, actually, about burial like in the 1800s, people like taking pictures with the deceased and stuff.
Yeah.
So I don't know like necessarily what the protocol is.
Of course, postmortems.
Yeah.
So early on, like I said, first settlement forward into maybe the 1660s or so. They're so practical. Death is just a fact, and we don't have a funeral. We don't do any of the stuff that we even start doing later in the 1600s and into the 1700s. You dig a hole, you put them in a box, you dig a hole, thanks, bye.
They'd be having funerals every day, probably multiple.
Yeah, exactly. There was no one at the time that wasn't touched by this stuff right through into the 1700s and certainly even into the 1800s and still until we really start getting a handle on medicine and germs and disease and keeping our food and keeping
how about washing your hands?
Yeah. So, it's definitely evolutionary, but it follows some pretty universal guidelines, and it evolves too. Those winged skulls and all that hairy, scary stuff. I knew I should have gotten this dude out. Evolve to things like that. These winged souls. Effigies. They're not meant to be the individual. They are meant to be the idea of being human. So they used the skulls and bones early on because that's how literal they were. To carve something into stone at the time, so late 1600s and into the early 1700s, to carve something into stone that looked human would have been considered a graven image and would have been sacrilegious. So they're falling back on the idea of conveying the idea of mortality by saying the bones. Everybody knows you got bones, and when you're dead, this is what's left. And you put wings on that winged skull, and the idea of that soul taking flight to the next world. But in the 1720s and 30s, there's a period called the Great Awakening. And they're still religious, they're still superstitious, but there's a big backlash against that high religiosity, that really strict interpretation, and that whole idea of the slightest transgression is all fire and brimstone. You still have a duty to that immortal soul to do the good work so that it gets off to the next world. But now not every little thing is the difference between heaven and hell. So that winged skull is allowed to grow some skin and take on a human or angelic reference without running the risk of being considered a graven image and being sacrilegious. It means exactly the same thing. It is just the more modern symbol for the time. And we got, other things, winged hourglasses, pretty birds that are soul symbols. We get the tools of the grave digger. We get celestial stuff, moons and suns and stars. But the winged skull and those symbols and this winged soul and the more modern symbols of that period through the 1700s, they're going to cross over all the time. You can't say, the winged skull stopped being used in 1742. And it has a lot to do with that idea that you don't get a tombstone as soon as you die. This would be exactly the same way today. If I'm going to pick my sister's tombstone, well, I might have a different idea of what imagery should be on it. And that influences them the same way we're influenced by what we choose to put on tombstones.
Yeah. And it still takes time too. Like sometimes it takes months to be able to get it out there and be put up and all
even
that.
today,
Yeah, that's what I was saying.
Yeah, absolutely.
So is there a different symbology for the celestial imagery?
A lot of times when I see them, I might see a sun and a moon. I've got a really beautiful one in the collection that is got a pretty little sun and a little moon, and then an angel in between, and she's looking up and she's pointing. And it's really folky. It's really primitive. It's a, I don't know, mid 1700s or so. And across the top, the curved top of the tombstone is called the tympanum, So above the art on the edge of the tympanum, it says "Rise, rise towards the skies." This is all about the beginning of the day, the end of the day, the passage of time, but also the promise that sun, when it passes over the sky and the moon comes out, the moon is going to go, and the sun is going to rise again on another day. I also see celestials on Masonic stones as well. And that's actually what this guy is that I showed with the little moon. There's a sun on one side, the Masonic G, and the I'm out of language.
Words.
Square and compass. There we go.
Oh, yeah, the square
yeah.
compass. Yeah, the G. Yeah.
So why are the Masons using the
Masonic
moon?
symbol is in the middle, and the moon is on the other side. So a lot of times those tombstones will also convey that idea that I belong to a particular group, like the Masons.
Do you know why the Masons were using the moon?
It's so the G in the Freemasons logo is for geometry, and they didn't necessarily believe in God, but like more of a universal creator. And I do think that sun and moon is a beginning and end thing, beginning and end of the day and beginning and end of life. But also that idea of the universe and the celestial mechanics of the universe as well.
Interesting.
Yeah, be careful. I can do this all day.
It is interesting.
I want a moon and a sun, Frosty. If I die before you, give me a moon and a sun.
There you go. You got you know her final wishes.
Yeah.
I wanted to go back in case people didn't know what a gravestone rubbing is. Could you explain that process?
Oh, sure. So this is kind of like when we had, it's sort of equivalent to when we had those magic books when you were a little kid. You painted with water, or you run a crayon or charcoal over it, and the image appears. It's the idea of heading out to the graveyard with a piece of paper and a crayon, a wax cake, charcoal, and putting that paper onto the tombstone. And, you put the paper up on the tombstone and it's blank. But then when you start rubbing with your medium, you get a transfer, really, of what's underneath that paper. It was a thing, and it also, if people were familiar with going into the churches in England and making brass rubbings, that was a thing that you used to get to do. But brass is very soft, and they figured out that, wow, maybe we shouldn't rub this all the time. It's starting to degrade, but it's the same idea. It's the same idea. It's about making an exact copy of what is on the face of that crypt, that box tomb, that tombstone, and it's just a way to get your favorite art home. I teach proper tombstone rubbing and cleaning processes because there is just so much poor information, outright misinformation out there. This isn't rocket science, but there are some rules to follow. There are proper processes so that you don't mess it up. So you don't mess up that stone.
So if somebody wants to go out and do a rubbing, what is something they shouldn't do?
Don't assume all stones are the same. We tend to think, oh, it's made out of stone, it's indestructible. And really nothing's farther from the truth. We've got 5 basic rules. No, first of all, get permission. In Massachusetts, one of the big misconceptions is that gravestone rubbing is illegal. Well, in Massachusetts, there's no sweeping law on the books that prohibits tombstone rubbing. It is left up to whoever oversees the burial ground to determine what they will and won't allow. There are public burial grounds and there are private ones. And often, particularly with the early ones, it's very difficult to tell who owns it and what the rules are. You're lucky if you get a sign out front that says what the name of the place is.
Yeah.
So get permission, know how to choose the right know how to choose a good candidate, know the right geology, don't work on anything that is in any way compromised.
Yeah, like if it looks like it's falling apart, maybe not do
Yeah.
that one.
Right, right. And if it looks like it probably shouldn't be messed with, just take its picture and it's okay. We strongly advocate for a barrier to be put between the stone and the working surface, so
Like
that
what?
plastic.
Okay.
Yeah, so some kind of impermeable barrier, usually plastic, that
Plastic,
will.
like, could you use plastic wrap?
We use things like trash bags and dry cleaning wrappers, the dry cleaning plastic, because that'll fit right over.
Oh, yes.
And that way you aren't putting one piece of tape on a stone. You are taping the bag to itself. You're taping the paper to the bag. And whatever medium you use, if for any reason you break through that paper, it's not going to get on the stone.
Yeah.
So use a barrier, use the right materials, and clean up after yourself when you're done. I have seen a tremendous amount of damage done, and most of the time, I think, initially with good intention, whether they're trying to rub or clean or make it easier to read. They're like, it's stone, let's go put some bleach on it. Or, hey, I can't read this, let's use some power tools. Hey, I'm going to bring a pressure washer to the graveyard.
No.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
The thing about a properly executed tombstone rubbing is it is an inert process, but that's the key. It has to be done properly. These objects have been out there day in and day out for hundreds of years. One New England winter or one summer of lawnmowers and weed whackers are far more detrimental to these stones than a properly executed rubbing. But again, because we tend to think that it's all stone is the same and is all indestructible, that's really where it can often go horribly wrong.
So if somebody wants to help preserve a cemetery or a headstone, what's the proper ways for preservation?
So find somebody that already knows how to do it. And a lot of times there are just, most of the time that kind of stuff happens just through grassroots. People are like, I want to save this place. What do I do? And friends groups form around different cemeteries. Sometimes all the cemeteries in a town are taken care of by a friends group. And that's everything from mowing the lawn to cleaning and resetting stones. Find somebody that's already doing it. Most of those people are more than happy to show you the right way to do things.
Yeah, because like there's no end to how many cemeteries need help, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that goes for little ones and big ones as well. I have been in cemeteries that are 200, 300 acres, and they were privately owned and abandoned and reburned.
Yeah, you don't even know.
You don't even know. Well, I can't think of any in Richmond, but you aren't far from Philadelphia. So in Philadelphia, this Mount Moriah Cemetery, 200 acres that was abandoned. They ran out of money. It was privately owned. They ran out of money in around 2000, and they locked the gate and they left.
Wow.
And you wouldn't even have known there was a burial ground. You wouldn't have known there was a cemetery there.
Yeah. It doesn't take long for nature to take things over.
It doesn't.
Yeah.
It doesn't.
Well, it's like, we were talking about this a little bit earlier about, some of the differences, with Virginia being so old, Massachusetts being old, the differences really between Virginia and Massachusetts was the fact that we didn't have like real big city pop up because it was all cash crop plantation farming in Virginia at first, essentially.
Yeah. So there's a lot of family plots. So
we get a lot of family plots here. And, sometimes you can just be going for a walk in the woods and come across, a cemetery, a family cemetery that's been
everywhere. A
matter of fact, the house I lived in when I was a teenager, they decided they were going to add on to the neighborhood. So like all of a sudden, all these woods that, used to exist on the other side of the neighborhood got cut down and they built all new homes. And then, like me and Jenny went for a walk, and like one of the new homes they built, there's a graveyard in the front yard.
Mm-hmm. That happened at the
we
last
have
place
that
we lived too.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have that here as well. It's the same thing. We had families that had large tracts of land. We were agricultural, and perfectly normal, perfectly acceptable to bury your own dead on your property.
Yep.
And then as those farms went away and land got divvied up and buildings got built, now that stuff is in people's front yards, in their backyards. If they survive, there's been many of them that didn't make it. But you never really know where you're going to find them.
Yeah. No. Some woods get cut down. Like, oh.
Yep, there it is. Wow.
There's some stones in there.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely.
So what other kind of symbolism, gravestone symbolism, do you have information about that we haven't talked about already?
Well, we've been very concentrated on the colonial period. And now it occurs to me that I should have brought something up from the 19th century as well, because there's a complete change as we move out of the 1700s. We've got the revolution. We start our own new nation. There's a rise in neoclassicism, and that's affecting our architecture and our art and our furniture and our dress and everything in the land of the living. But I
have a question with that too.
Land of the dead too.
While you're talking about it, because this is one of the areas I've looked at a little bit. So when we talk about the witch trials, when we talk about Salem, I know that like kind of begins kind of the change from Puritanism, kind of starts spelling out of favor after that. Do we see a change in iconography in the late 1600s into the 1700s, or does it stay the same, that symbolism?
No, all that stuff, all those winged skulls and the hourglasses and Father Time with the scythe and the skeletons and all of that and the Latin memento mori and Latin like this fugit or fugit aura. All the swift passage of time, that stuff is en vogue, if you will, through the 1700s. And as we move into the 1800s, we have all that revolutionary change. We have westward expansion. We have we start moving from being an agrarian society to being an industrialized nation. So those modern people of the 19th century look back at these guys and they're like, whoa, what a bunch of barbarians. They're unenlightened, they're primitive, we are modern people. And they're really taking their cues from the classic civilizations of the Greeks and the Romans. The founding fathers modeled the country on the ideas of those folks who were the founders of the concepts of democracy and the republic. The idea of the people governing themselves, but you also have real-time archaeology happening as we come out of the 1700s. Pompeii is coming to light. It's coming up out of the ground for the first time. There are Napoleon is in Egypt. In the 19th century, you can get on a boat and take the grand tour of Europe, and everybody could just collect stuff and bring it home. But also, all of that comes together to come to a new idea of iconography for the tombstones. You've got the spiritualists and the transcendentalists are doing their seances. We're thinking about communing with nature, preserving nature. Thoreau is writing about literally preserving nature and communing with the dead. And, because for the folks of the 19th century, it was a drag to die, but it was far worse to not be remembered. So you had monuments put up, markers and mausolea, and these become the cities of the dead that you can experience all over Europe. So the symbols get much softer. You get that nod to nature with flowers, engraved flowers and trees and acorns and ivy. Fern and willow is a very common motif, really the mainstream motif of the 19th century. So it's that weeping willow, which is a excellent symbol of sorrow and mourning, and also the urn, based on the cinerary urns that are being excavated all across Europe and Greece and all this ancient civilization stuff coming to light. They're cinerary urns, either through cremation, which has been practiced for thousands of years, or they would put their dead out on the edge of the city until they naturally decayed, and then they would put the remains in these vessels. So that becomes, we embrace classicism in the 19th century, and it permeates both the land of the living and the land of the dead, and it shows up in the land of the dead with those urns and willows, with the flowers, that whole idea of the language of flowers in the 19th century. So much more sentimental, still religious, but often a lot more along the lines of spirituality and remembrance and sentimentality than
Very
puritanical religious ideology.
Very interesting, because all of that imagery is down here in the South as well. The weeping willows and the urns and the flowers and the ivy and the little stumps. Sometimes there's a little stump. Or
the tree stumps. Yeah, they're fabulous.
Yeah.
They're fabulous.
Yeah.
So that is.
Yeah, and that's a 19th century accoutrement. That is.
Yeah.
I've seen some of those tree stumps that are so realistic. You don't.
They look like a real tree stump.
Not really trees, and they're meant to be the idea of the tree that, like human lives. The tree starts, the tree ends, and you'll see them cut or branches cut, of life interrupted, and they are meant to blend on the landscape.
So that's really interesting that, the 1600s, 1700s, the imagery is very localized and they're parts of the country. But then you get to the 1800s and it's kind of spread throughout. But I guess, like you were saying, because of what's happening in the world, it's become a little bit more worldly than just in their little pockets of places.
It takes us a while to get there, but after the War of 1812, you start getting a sense of nationalism.
Right.
Like you start getting the Star Spangled Banner and all that stuff after the War of 1812. It takes a while to set in, really till after the Civil War. But yeah, like I could see how that, you start getting these things that are spreading through the, through the new.
And they're being more influenced by European things and historical things. And that makes a lot of sense. I never knew that.
Once we come out of the Civil War, or as a result of the Civil War, we start embalming. And so that's going to change our interactions with our mortality. We're going to less and less dying at home, more moving into facilities, medicine, trying to help repair whatever the illness is and sort of cheat death. So you don't have, you're not dying at home, you're not having the wake at home. We start getting away from those fabulous postmortems, although they're still into the 20th century. But we start cheating death on a regular basis. And as we come out of the 1800s and firmly into the 1900s, when we have medicine to do all kinds of crazy stuff, death becomes something we don't talk about. The cemeteries become places we don't go because we aren't faced with it the way folks that in the centuries previous to us were.
Yeah, people start washing their hands.
Right. I honestly, this is completely my own opinion, but I really think one of the reasons why we behave the way we do, why we were so freaked out about COVID pandemic, was we were faced with a disease for the first time in 100 years that we didn't have medicine for. You couldn't just go take a pill. There was no vaccine. There was no medicine for it. We didn't know what it was. And we had to think about, whoa, anytime I do something, it might kill me.
Good.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we just didn't have that.
Yeah. And think like for such a huge part of our human history, that's the way people lived every day.
It would have been something everyone would have had to think about. Well, let's pick up there in just a second. It is the top of the hour, so I just want to let everybody know who's joined us since the beginning. Welcome in. If you have joined us in the middle here, we're talking about gravestones tonight. We're talking to Brenda Sullivan from Gravestone Girls, and we are talking about the symbology, the history of gravestones, and we're kind of getting into the ritual of death and things like that. So if you have any questions, make sure you throw them in chat because we can get those out there for you and see if we can get you an answer. So if you have any questions, feel free to put them in chat wherever you are watching the show. Also, I guess, we wanted to talk about going back into this now. We were talking about COVID and kind of, I guess, like a plague. But me and Jenny were just having this conversation the other day because we were talking about, we keep talking about like what this world is like post-COVID, how many things are different and like how we reacted to it. Like how we reacted to it. It became very politicized and things like that. So I don't really want to get into that, but it's just like, how did we react to it when it happened and how do we think we would react to it now? And like, what are some things that maybe we would have done differently and things like that. But it's very true because, especially coming into this as someone who is a history educator and things like that. First thing I thought when that came out was like, the Spanish flu and like, how that had such a huge impact that most people don't realize because they don't really get into history, but how detrimental these things can be. And I was telling Jenny, like, you go back and read like Thucydides, or you read whatever, and you're talking about the plague that wipes through Athens, and like history is filled with plagues that wipes out a huge portion of the population, the Black Death, whatever,
and over again. Yeah.
So all of my life, someone who is interested in history, I've been like, it's going to happen eventually. There's going to be some kind of outbreak that's going to bring a massive amount of death. And how are we going to react to that? And so for me, it was almost like I was getting my questions answered in real time in 2020. Right. But yeah, like for sure, I think that's something that people had to kind of come face to face with again in our society.
Yeah, we don't think about it, and it's really not that different. You could leave the house today and get hit by a bus. You don't know, but we don't think about it because it just we don't know. I know adults who have never been to a funeral, or they won't take their children to see grandma's wake and funeral because it's too disturbing.
Yeah,
it's a fact. So
I think we might see the end of wakes, to be honest with you. I find that a lot of people, I grew up in a family where wakes were the common thing. Like everybody went to go, and it's still kind of that way in my family. But I know for Jenny, and I know a lot of other people that we've had this conversation with that are just like, wakes should not happen. Like it's really weird. Do you kind of see that as well?
Dead bodies.
Yeah.
The wake isn't for the dead person. The wake is for the living.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All the pomp and circumstance of the funeral and everything, that's not for the dead person. That's for the living. The cemeteries are for the living.
Yep.
Yeah.
Folks
for sure.
The cemeteries are dead.
Well, I say this all the time, because being a paranormal podcast, we do some paranormal investigations.
I forgot that part. They're not actually dead, are they?
Yeah. Well,
depends on who you ask.
I would say, the way that I've looked at it and some of the experiences we've had is if you want to find the dead, don't go to the graveyard because they're not there for the most part. Like, if someone...
I'm going to agree with you on that one.
Yeah. Like if you believe in the paranormal, like, could there be something there? Yeah. But from the paranormal side of it, with the people who investigate, they tend to still be around their families and in homes and in places where they enjoyed spending their time. The people who died were never in the cemetery. They didn't hang out in the cemetery.
Why would they hang out?
So why would they stay there?
Buried?
So a lot of times
it bugged me. I'm like, well, okay, we're only going to go to the cemetery to look at the dead people. We're only going to go in the middle of the night.
Yeah, yeah.
No, I like the idea that they go where their people are. They go home.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if that exists, if there's ghosts, if there's spirits, why would they just hang out at the cemetery, somewhere that probably has no significance or memory or emotional significance to them whatsoever?
Well, Joe finally showed up, and he's got a question. I joined a little late, but do we see a shift to some more specialization of making gravestone markers? I know some of the early gravestones here in Connecticut were made of very sandstone, fragile sandstone,
He's
and they don't survive well versus later granites.
Yeah, so the idea about early tombstones are made out of what's locally available. So you use basically sort of what's in your own backyard, because you've got to get a horse and a wagon. You got to get on questionable roads. You got to go get it out of the ground. You got to bring it back. Then you can start working it. So what Joe is talking about being in Connecticut, he's got a lot of really beautiful gravestones of that period, the late 1600s and into the 1700s, that are made from the red and brown sandstones out of the Connecticut River Valley. So the symbolism looks like it does in Massachusetts and around New England for the time period, but it is a very fragile stone. It wicks water up from underground, and it actually deteriorates from the outside in. So it can look it can look thick and it can look really good, but it can be eggshell thin because the crystalline structure on the inside has been compromised because of water. And he's right. They're very sandstone is very granular, so it's very easily worn away. And it's kind of interesting. So we have all these slates in the colonial period, and when you get to the 19th century, they move to marble. So we're going to separate and also in the 19th century is when the graveyard, the burial ground, becomes the cemetery. They're not cemeteries until Mount Auburn is founded in 1831 in Watertown/Cambridge. They share a border. And the word cemetery is derived from a Greek word that means sleeping place or dormitory. And so it's calling on the classicism, and it's also reflecting the modern idea about where we pass away, we fall asleep, we go to the Summerland. And in the colonial period, it's return to dust, be food for the worms, this mortal clay. And so they make the break in these newfangled cemeteries. They make a break with landscaping, with it becomes very park-like and pastoral. They change material of the tombstones because now we can get marble because we have waterways, we have railroads, so you can get marble from farther away. You can get it from Vermont. You can get it limestones from Indiana. You can get marbles and limestones from down south. You can get Carrara marble brought in on a ship from Italy. So it's newly available. It's going to be that newfangled idea, and it's also it's white and bright, so it's symbolic of purity in heaven and what they must have looked like when they were brand new and white and sharp and clear on the cemetery landscape. But the one thing they didn't understand about the geology of marble is very much like the sandstones in Connecticut. They're very granular, so we lose a lot of the imagery to wind and water erosion, and they're also very porous, so they absorb the pollutants in the atmosphere, the acids in the atmosphere, and there's a chemical reaction with the calcium carbonate that marble is that causes this black crust the soluble salts leach out of the stone and they go black. They can be cleaned. The biological stuff can be cleaned off of them. The soluble salts can be cleaned. if you know what you're doing. It's not rocket science, but again, you learn from someone that already knows how to do it. So you can make them white. Again, I have seen some that are so blinding white, you need sunglasses. But once the image has eroded away, that's really the end of it.
Yeah.
You can't.
It's not going back.
Yeah, you can't bring that back. But that's a really interesting irony is that they were like, we are getting away from all this old hairy, scary stuff, and we're going to be bright and white on the landscape. And we're going to choose this newly available material that's available at a wide variety of locations and distances without really realizing that they were not going to be as durable as the slates that were their predecessors.
Yeah. And then they're leaching black stuff all over them. That's like the opposite of what they were going for.
Sometimes they're so dark you can't even tell that they're marble.
Yeah. Wow.
And if you get one that is broken for whatever reason, the lawnmower hits it or whatever, a chunk falls off it, all of a sudden it's dark on the outside and it's got this bright white on the inside because it's been protected from the elements. But they can be cleaned.
So, one thing I noticed from going around old cemeteries here, when we go back, to colonial or early American period, is we have a lot of tombs and above ground burials.
A mausoleum. Yeah.
Yeah. Do we see that a lot in New England as well? And is there a certain period of time that comes into style or out of style?
Yeah. So we get mausolea, 19th century. That is your tomb with a view. That is your home away from home. That is money. Absolutely. The colonial folks, it wasn't, look how great I was. You're supposed to be humble and you're supposed to be doing the good work and all of that stuff. But you've got all this new money in the 19th century. And you've got, it's no longer about religious beliefs. They're still religious, of course, in many cases, but this is about who we were, what we did, and money is just money. The sky's the limit if you've got money. And I have seen mausolea with upstairs, downstairs. I have seen them that sleep 20 or 30.
Wow.
I have seen them with the most amazing art and architecture incorporated. Very common to put stained glass windows in them.
I was going to say the stained glass. Yep.
Yeah, they look like houses. They can be small or they can be very big, but they very much look like houses. And you put a stained glass window in it. Now you're lighting that chamber from the outside, and the stained glass is flooding that space with color. And it was very common to go. The cemeteries in the 19th century were very social spaces anyway. Yeah. So everybody's in there. They're visiting the loved ones. They're picnicking. They are cleaning the tombs. They are remembering the dead, but they're also socializing with each other. Their neighbors, their living neighbors are there because everybody's in the cemetery doing this. And there are great articles that you can read that, Mr. Smith had a fabulous mausoleum in Greenwood Cemetery, and he had to get away from the heat of the day and the hustle and bustle of the family. And he went into the family mausoleum to read his book, and the door actually accidentally shut behind him. And it was 2 days before they realized he was missing, but he was inside the mausoleum. And it's good stuff. It's good.
Wow. You need to put a rock and prop the door open.
Yeah, right. Prop that door open. Prop that door open. Because as much as I like those spaces, I'm not really sure I can handle being in there for a couple of days.
Not ready to go to sleep in there yet.
So focusing on, we're getting close to the end. So when we talk about Gravestone Girls, what do you have coming up? What do you see as like next for Gravestone Girls, and what do you enjoy kind of doing the most right now when it comes to this line of work?
So I would say we're always on the road. I do a lot of markets, and there's more than just me. There are multiple Gravestone Girls, including my 92-year-old father. working behind the scenes to keep me going. And but I am the face. I am the one that can sit here and do this for hours. So I do all the presentations. I take us on the road to a lot of places. We do a number of the oddities and curiosities expos that go on around the country. Next up is Detroit in July.
Cool.
And then Providence Expo after that. And then the Buffalo Expo. And then the Richmond Expo.
Yeah, we'll have to come see you when you come down here.
And my friend is giving nighttime tours at the Hollywood Cemetery. So I've already got my tickets for that so that we don't miss it.
There we go.
I do a lot of presentations. So I talk to people a lot about the things we've talked about tonight. I work with a lot of genealogy groups. And one of the things we're doing is that we've really tapped the 3D scanning. And we are doing a lot of work to scan and replicate and even miniaturize tombstones. And it also opens up what we can work with. So under my touch processes, I can't work with Joe's tombstones, with his sandstone tombstones in Connecticut. But they've got great art and I really want them. But now I can. Now I can get anything I want because of the technology we've been able to achieve with a couple of great collaborations. And I will say the very next thing for Gravestone Girls is at about 6 o'clock tomorrow morning, I'm getting in the car and driving to York, Pennsylvania to go to Cemetary Camp.
Ooh.
Oh, okay.
Awesome. You got a lot going on.
Cemetary Camp is what the big kids call the annual conference for the Association for Gravestone Studies. And if I could give them a plug, they're a really great organization, all things tombstone and cemetery. Members are all kinds of interests. The resources that they have available in the archives and online are extensive. And I've met a ridiculous amount of fabulous and fun people when I go to camp. And camp moves every year. So last year we were in Atlanta. This year we're in York. There's rumors that it may be Rhode Island next year, but I don't know if that's true. But we've been in the West Coast. We've been in Nova Scotia. We've been in Middle America. And it's 4 days. It's 2 days of bus trips and 2 days of workshops and educational presentations. It's a full day, all night. There's evening presentations after dinner. There's late night where we all sit around and drink bourbon and be silly.
That sounds amazing.
Tremendous amount of fun.
Okay, so we only got a few minutes left.
Well, I had one other question real quick.
Okay.
Real quick. So were you saying that do you work with people on genealogy? Is that something that you help people with?
No, I would be a horrible researcher for genealogy because I am such a squirrel. Like, oh, look at that. That guy was a tombstone cutter. I got to read about him. I'm supposed to be a man, but no, what's really kind of organically cropped out of what I already did for Gravestone Girls and making the castings, people in other parts of the country that trace their ancestry to New England will get in touch and say, hey, my 9th great grandmother is in this cemetery. Can you document this? Can you take pictures? Can you make me a plot map? Can you check on it to make sure that it's okay? Do we need to do any cleaning? Do we need does it need to be reset? Is it still there? And will also ask me to do replicas for the family as well.
Awesome.
That's really cool.
Yeah, it's wonderful. It happened very, like I said, very organically. A woman came into my booth at one of the markets I was doing, and in my collection, I had a winged skull from a tombstone that turned out to be her 9th great grandmother.
Oh wow, that's so cool.
And it actually happens more than you think. It's not an everyday occurrence, but it's really cool when it happens. And I do go to the genealogy conferences as well. They have vendor rooms. I vend there. And I also love to sit in on the presentations because the research and the technology being employed in the world of genealogy is extraordinary.
Awesome. Okay. We have a few minutes left. I want to do a speed round here. Favorite cemetery?
Why does everybody ask me that? Usually my answer is the last one I've been in. But again, because I've been in cemeteries all over the world, near and far. And even those that I've been in before that are local, I always see something new.
Yeah.
It's always a surprise.
Yeah.
So I went to a couple of them in Spain that were pretty spectacular.
Awesome.
In Italy and China and California. And
wow. What's your favorite imagery?
I really like the primitive colonial stuff. The creepier, the better. But I'm a Victorian clutter queen. So I am I love, there's not enough marble or gild on the planet to keep me. There's just not too much. Maybe I said too much of a good thing is a good thing. So.
Okay. What about a cemetery or a location that you haven't been to yet that you would like to go to?
Oh, so in northern Italy, there's one in Milan, and I can't remember the other city. Genoa. There are two monumentali. Cemeterio Monumentale. There's one in Milan and there's one in Genoa that is just full of extraordinary sculpture and amazing imagery. And you go to some of these cemeteries in Europe and there's literally like deathbed scenes and like full scale people in bed and the Spanish cemetery I was talking about, like Poblano something, again, can't remember, but there's a dead guy and he's being cradled by a skeleton that's standing high, that's got great big wings behind him. It's a super famous stone.
Yes,
we made a pilgrimage just to go see that, and it turns out the whole cemetery was just as good.
Wow. Coldrake wants to know about this. What about the Skull Catacombs
in Paris? Yes, magnificent. I've also been to the Sedlec ossuary in outside of Prague. That was when nobody knew what it was, which was fabulous. I also got yelled at in Italian at the Capuchin catacombs. We're getting a little too close.
Yeah. Back up, lady.
Yeah, lady, don't touch that. Don't touch that.
All right, so
you know what? One more place that I haven't been that I want to go. I've been to the Vatican 3 times. And there's a whole thing under St. Peter's Basilica where a bunch of the popes are buried. And I didn't know the first time.
Oh, wow.
And I couldn't get in there because I couldn't get tickets the second time. And like, let me in.
There you go.
Sounds like you just need a whole long trip to Italy.
Yeah.
See all these things you want to see.
I love Italy.
So for those who want to find you, see what you do, or purchase one of your replicas, where can they find you and purchase your goods?
Excellent. Shameless self-promotion time. Website is gravestonegirls.com. Our whole catalog, we have more than 200 images in the collection. So it's all decorative, magnets, coasters, chocolate. You picked up on the chocolate. Good job. Wall plaques. We're going to come out with a bunch of other stuff if I can ever find a moment. And also on the website is a section called Learn. So it's links to our favorite cemetery and tombstone websites. And also we have a lot of educational information there about locating tombstone carvers, tombstone restoration, and not just in the Northeast, but around the country, and overseas as well. Plus, there's a glossary of terms that you can download and maybe even print out if people still print stuff out nowadays. That covers, there's probably 5 or 6 pages there put together by the Association for Gravestone Studies about symbols and their commonly accepted meanings.
Wow.
So that's the website. And then we have a social media presence, Gravestone Girls on Facebook and Instagram.
Awesome. So there you go. Go check them out. Get yourself some chocolate or a magnet or look up them terms if you're interested. Well, Brenda, thank you so much for coming on. This conversation was wonderful.
Thank you. It was so much fun. I warned you I could do this all night.
Wonderful, wonderful. And so for all you listening out there, we have that listed. If you're listening at another time, another place, we have that the website listed down in the description below. That's gravestonegirls.com. Go check it out. For all you who are listening at another time and another place, we will see you all next time.